Tomi Fatunde and with Dr. Reverend Sofia Betancourt, as well as all of our wonderful drum members who've come and with so many ideas, thoughts, wonderings to share. I'm so glad people had a chance to caucus and say hello to their friends and long lost people they haven't seen in a while. It's always wonderful to see all the faces. And we're just really excited. I want to caution that we do have a lot of questions up and we are just not going to be able to get to all of them today, but we will be forwarding these on to Dr. Reverend Sofia so that she can have them and when possible, share her insights into those wonderings that you have. I'd like to now continue by, again, my name is Esperanza Garza Dan Weber, the president of Drum, and Tomi Fatunde, our vice president, is now going to introduce the woman of the hour, Dr. Reverend Sofia Betancourt.
Hello, everyone, and thank you again, Reverend Dr. Betancourt, for joining us. I will keep this very brief. I just wanted to mention a few highlights and then we can dive right into questions. So many of you may know Dr. Sofia from her time as interim co-president of the UUA in 2017. She's also served many different roles and has been was central to drum leadership in the early 2000s. So we're really always excited to have her in drum space. She has served in congregational ministry and also in leadership at Star King, the seminary, and most recently at the UU Service Committee. So those are a few of her roles that she served. She's also, I love this phrase, an unabashed universalist is how she was described on her campaign website. And she's the grandchild of a 7th generation Unitarian. And she was raised in New York by parents who were immigrants from Panama and Chile. And I would love to hear more about her work as a fabric artist. I don't know if we'll have time tonight. And congratulations on the recent publication of this book, Echo Womanism at the Panama Canal, Black Women, Labor, and Environmental Ethics. I'll stop there. Those are just a few highlights. And Reverend Sofia, if you have anything you would like to start with as opening, please feel free.
Thank you so much. Thank you for welcoming me, beloveds. It's always good to come home to drum and to just be in conversation and in community. So thank you to you all. I really want to say there are all these political things about titles, and especially Black women. But in drum space, really, I beg you, Sofia is fine. I've been a member of this community for a long time. I do think it matters, right? We get held in our accomplishments very lightly in the world. This is an issue of oppression and injustice, but I hope that at home, like we are now, we can just be in community. So if you are introducing me on an interfaith panel, please Reverend Doctor me. In this space, really, Sofia is great. Yoga socks, yes, amazing. Thank you. I am a fiber artist, mostly knitting. I am an avid spinner and can crochet enough to bind off an edge. That's basically what I have been learning how to weave a little bit. But fiber arts are meditative and hold me when my mind is spinning. So that's a thing. I am excited to be in dialogue with you all. I really see, I know we have caucuses within drum, but drum is also a caucus. And so I am happy to answer any kind of questions that feel most live. And I also want to say that I think there are sometimes questions that are best asked and discussed, right, in spaces like these. So I invite that as well. And I'm a pretty transparent person. If I feel like I can't answer a question, I'll at least tell you why. But you will get transparency and honesty from me because I don't know how else we do the work of community well. I don't want to take up a lot of time. I'm excited to see you all. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you. So in preparation for this panel, we had asked people to register and submit questions, and we've looked over them and tried to pick questions just like you had suggested, Sofia, that might be important for us to hear in a BIPOC space specifically. We privilege that. And so one question that we had, the first question that we're asking tonight is, and feel free. There are so many questions to be as brief as you'd like on them.
I'm
Because
so
they're
bad at that. I'm going to try.
so whatever we do is what we do, y'all, right? Like, we're good. So, we're in this historic moment, right? That's been marked by like issues of the eighth principle, Article 2, and responses that have kind of deepened some of the divide between us as a UU community. So what vision of leadership do you have that can push us beyond these chasms and into the future?
Thank you. One of the things I want to say that it's actually really great to see the faces of a lot of friendly troublemakers that I've been in the work with for a long time. Thanks for being here tonight. And I want to say that the story that's being told right now, which is absolutely the story you just shared, does not match what I know about our history. So the first thing I want to say is that I actually don't agree that this moment has deepened divides in our faith. I just don't think that's true. I think that there has been an arc of very intentional, very well organized, long sustained counter-oppressive work, anti-racism work within the UUA that has been addressed from all of these lenses and angles at once. Multi-layer drum has been at the heart of so much of that work. And what I think we're seeing right now is a very loud outcry by an extremely small group of people. And I understand where when we have been laboring so long, this is our faith. I understand where that rubs up against our worry, against our deepest drive for community, for accountability, for covenant. But just like I remember Queen Boston used to tell us to stop saying that Unitarian Universalism is a white faith because we've been here for hundreds of years, I think we need to stop saying that the work that is counter-oppressive, that the work of expressing our values is causing divides. It's not. I'm seeing the same beloveds who in the early 90s used their privilege to silence the conversation by refusing to show up for it, which worked 30 years ago, now being very angry that their dismissal of the conversation isn't working anymore, that the community has right? Paula promised us a tipping point for decades. I remember being 20 years ago and saying, Paula, we are so far from a tipping point. And she was like, Sophia, tipping point is coming. She was adamant. She was right. Right? Not just Paula, many, but I particularly remember this dialogue with Paula Cole-Jones, as I see a lot of you nodding. And so I think one of the things we have to do is right-size our storytelling. It is remarkable that in our UU congregations, there are almost no congregations left where not talking about counter-oppressive work is acceptable in any way. I couldn't have imagined that in 1993. That's just not who we were. Right? I think it's important to say UUs are articulating their values, and rather than saying, I'm not talking to you about this, more than 10,000 UUs showed up to participate in an Article 2 process. That is a much more accurate story. So the first thing is truth-telling. Thank you, Joseph. Truth-telling, a willingness to just talk about our history with honesty, and to also talk about our theology. So the other piece of my response to this is that universalism is not a faith that, manifests the all-embracing love by waiting for everyone to be on board. That's not what universalism is. Universalism teaches us that everyone is worthy and that there's always a pathway back into community. But the very important point, particularly at this time in our history, when there is so much movement that you cannot deny the movement is happening, is to not hold the entire faith in a place of stagnation because a few voices have decided to be really loud. This is hard because we love the members of our community. You'll notice my language about our beloveds is beloved. I see them as part of our beloved community. There's always a path back. We are not waiting. And I've been saying this in presidential forums. I've also been talking about pastoral care. I think there are some real issues of grief, some real issues of loss. I don't want to minimize those things, but to imagine somehow that the immense, intentional, effective, faithful work has led to division, it's actually just not true.
So arguably, as UUA president, you'll be functioning as Unitarian Universalism's pastor. How do you address someone who's been harmed in UU spaces and is looking for next steps to be fed in this community?
It's a great question. I want to say that this is new It's for the first time that the UUA president's job description says that the president of the UUA is the spiritual head of the faith. And I say that because it's more than pastoral. And I think that sometimes a pastoral response is also a prophetic response. It's also a willingness, right, to retell and reshape story rather than to be silent in the face of conflict. That said, I feel like this is a role that has been a part of my ministry for the last 20 years or more. I am often someone who shows up in community and conflict, often someone who shows up to partner with a beloved who's been really harmed by one of our communities. So part of it, I think, is faithful communal response. This is actually something I worry about. Right, we have so many beloved. I'm thinking of like Danielle DeBon, our Hope, our drum chaplaincy team, our blue chaplain. We have folks who are adjacent to the system, who hold us in community. And many of us have our roles shifting, which is not really shocking, but a live question for me is, as those roles shift, how are we making sure that we're not losing some of the less official ways or adjacent ways that we've been holding each other in these times? That said, some of the things that I do is make sure that people are connected to communities like Drum, connected to aspects of Unitarian Universalism that allow us to live into what we best know. Also to remind folks that there are options for religious community and fellowship broader than the congregation. And I think part of it is showing up for the conversations we're having right now about what makes someone authentically a Unitarian Universalist. And the challenge is that, yes, we are a covenantal faith, but expecting congregational membership of someone might actually just be doubling down on harm at times. Right, and so how do we understand what it means to be an active Unitarian Universalist? And as we do more bylaw work, I hope that membership in spaces like Drum and Trust and Blue and Equal Access will be held with a different weight for all the reasons that I think we understand. That said, I also do really think that there is such a thing as a public prophetic pastoral leadership style. I think we saw that in Bill Sinkford's presidency. And that is something that I feel very committed to actually speaking to trauma-informed ministry from the role of the presidency. I think that's something that you actually respond to well, and goodness in these times. I think it's something that we really need. That said, I also hope that, further empowering our national staff, they do this already beautifully, to do more of that more publicly. We see it more at congregational levels or regional levels, things like the Hope for Us team or Uplift or other ministries where we really get a pastoral response. I think there's room for our staff to be more forward-facing in pastoral care, especially with such need right now. So I'm trying not to get ahead of myself because, of course, I don't get to be in intimate relationship working with our staff yet soon, but it's on my heart.
Well, I'm going to kind of skip ahead to a question that we had a little further down that I think matches really well with what you were saying, which about the role of community ministry. Since we have so many situations where people are now seeking other types of avenues or ways into UUism, community ministries such as practiced by Drum or Blue or other groups, I think has had a larger role as we see this technology that makes it possible for us to come together. Do you have, or what are your ideas for mainstreaming more participation for UUs who prefer not to be part of local congregations?
Again, I know it doesn't sound super exciting, but actually this bylaw work of defining what a Unitarian Universalist is feels really important to me. We have some deep history around how we understand that, and it doesn't necessarily match how our ministries are lived out in the world today. I think we need more of a hybrid from what we've known and what we have manifested really, right, in this time of pandemic. I think we've learned a lot about community care that I hope we will build on and hold on to, even as some of the longing for community drives us back to some of the structures we knew prior to COVID-19, prior to emerging from the quarantine stage anyway of pandemic. Also, this may sound like an odd response to this answer, but I'm hopeful also that we can resource our congregations in continuing ways to keep doing their accountable covenantal work. We need our community ministries, we always have. And I would like to see folks who are not called to congregational participation for that to be a choice, rather than harm reduction. And I don't think we're always there yet. So I would like to see, you know, there's a whole team working on innovative Unitarian Universalist ministry, which is exciting. The UUA is putting some funding revenue behind that. I think we're going to see some of those projects come out into the world soon. But the fact that we are thinking about how do we better resource ministries that don't take the kind of brick and mortar form that we often think of, I think is really important. There have been a lot of beautiful entrepreneurial attempts, but they haven't always been funded by us, right? So the risk is always on like one leader or one small community, which just isn't really a sustainable way forward. So I'm excited about that piece. I'm also excited about resourcing our more traditional congregations to hold their values and their covenants with our beloveds in healthier ways than sometimes happen today.
So a somewhat related question that came out of one of the caucuses is about ability and accessibility. So this questioner asks, so after the COVID times sort of gave a wider experience of accessibility to the able, as the person says, how do you see our leaders and UUs going forward in a journey of being more accessible and more inclusive to disabled, deaf, neurodivergent people, and body positive, especially for BIPOC UUs and youth with multiple identities?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you. I mean, honestly, I think we need to begin with some reparation and apology for harm. This also, let me say, I do not consider us to be in a post-COVID time. We are not. We just had a super spreader event in one of our congregations last week, and we have beloveds, right? My partner has a genetic immune disorder, so we are still a lot more conservative than other folks. This question of how are we making sure that in what I call our emergence from the quarantine phase of COVID-19, that we're not just reverting, right? Just reverting to congregational life being what is easy for a majority of people without taking access and inclusion into account in the ways that I think we are called to based on our values. I think the good news is I am seeing congregations leaning much more into maintaining a lot of the systems they developed during that quarantine stage than abandoning them. We had a little bit of fear, you know, like a year or so ago, year and a half ago, that in this kind of exuberance and this longing for physical in-person connection, which is also real and can also be an access point. I think we need to remember that for some folks, actually being physically present with other people is a type of access. That we would lose a lot of what we had gained. So part of it for me is, again, about continuing the kind of resourcing. We saw such, I mean, if I can just lift the UUA national staff for a minute, we saw such a phenomenal response in really difficult times. And I'm hoping that we can continue to build on that good work and to continue to build on some of the best practices that we developed in congregations and in communities. Also, I know that organizations like Drum and like Blue have been using some of the technologies that other congregations leaned into for much longer than the realities of COVID-19, right? We who have been nationally spread have been having to do the work of connection and internationally spread, right, for quite some time. So I think that it's important that we remember that this is central to who we are as Unitarian Universalists and to community building. And I hope that we will continue to understand that there are a range of access needs. You know, sometimes I think we rely, this happens right with BIPOC folk too. We rely so heavily sometimes on the front line leaders that we know, rather than the full range of frontline communities who are impacted, that we sometimes inadvertently leave like subsets of beloveds out, even as we're trying to do the work. So I've been talking with Carrie McDonald actually about getting some good consultants in to help us with large things like General Assembly and nuanced, multifaceted access to help us ask some really hard questions about how we come together in community and how we do that well. That's really easy to say. This is actually to find consultants, you know, in organizations that are founded and led by people with disabilities who do really large scale, national level. If you know groups who do this work well, please reach out. Even just the research phase of finding the right people to work with has been challenging. I think we are trying to lean into a standard that still a lot of institutions aren't trying to meet. So this is ongoing work. I think what we do is continually ask the questions and continually center the voices of, and we know this work, right? Center the voices of those most impacted and ask good questions, and prioritize our resources for accessibility, no question.
Thank you so much. So to go to some of the questions that we got tonight, and maybe I'm gonna look at combining a little bit. From the Latina caucus, we saw a question about um, a vision or plan that is intentional for building Latina and BIPOC outreach. And I'd like to couple that with a question, a sentiment that we got from the Asian Pacific Islander, I believe, or maybe not that group, maybe a different one, specifically about international outreach for UUs. Can you talk a little bit about what you would like to do to reach out to the global majority, either within the United States or also internationally? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. I'm not sure you're going to love my answer, which is like, it is too soon for me to answer that question. I am very aware that I'm going to be the least informed person on the UUA staff in a month. I mean, it's just true. And so part of it is getting up to speed on what is our international office already doing? What is our communications staff team already? There is beautiful, rich work that's in the works already at the national staff level, a lot of which I don't know about. So I'm very aware of that. And I think it's important to honor, like, one of the things in widening the circle of concern is shifting us from this culture where the president of, like, where if you like know the president of the UUA, you can get your particular needs met. And if you don't, you know, maybe you'll have better luck with the next president. I mean, it's unfortunate, but that's really true to kind of how we've done leadership. So this is something I care about deeply. I am the daughter of immigrants on both sides, right? My mother's from Panama, my father's from Chile, my family is around the world. I'm very excited. There's going to be a gathering of international UU groups. You may or may not know that some of our structures that held us together, you know, Unitarians, Unitarian Universalists around the world, a lot of them have been sunsetted in recent years. And like happens often when we sunset something, we have not created new containers or institutions to hold that work. So we're gathering in Prague in October to have some of those conversations. I'm really excited about that. I've been, you know, working at UUSC for the last year and in conversation with the head of the Holding India project and just some of the other just really good institutions that do some of our international work. A thing that's very much on my mind is I think that when you talk to UUs about international Unitarian Universalism and that piece of outreach, we think immediately of Britain. You know, we think of Europe, we think of Hungary, whereas we have UUs around the world, right? There are UUs in Spanish-speaking countries, there are UUs in African countries, there are UUs in India and in the Philippines, and there are Unitarians or Unitarian Universalists all over the map. So I'm excited about a meeting where the structures might be recreated so that Eurocentrism isn't the first thing we think about when we think about international Unitarian Universalism. I think there's real potential for that in this meeting, and I'm excited about it. In terms of outreach nationally, you know, within the United States, oh goodness, we've done this badly so many times. If I can just be really honest about this, I think some of you have experienced some of that. I know that there are some intentional structures within the UUA to attend to the needs of BIPOC religious professionals differently. I don't just mean finding our way home. I mean even communication structures and check-ins and resourcing for support. I have real questions about this. How we do the nuanced work of modeling who we are called to be in the world without exoticizing and tokenizing a few UUs to kind of sign on the dotted line for the things we already knew we wanted to do. And I think a lot of us have been in those rooms and in those meetings. But a lot of it is, are you listening to the beloveds in your community? I don't just mean your congregation, like in your surrounding community, and what is it about their needs that meets the call or mission of the institution that you're in? Continuing the countercultural work of Unitarian Universalism, not simply being sanctuary where we feel safe, right, from whatever religious trauma we might be carrying, but to acknowledge, right, that we are the carriers of an inherited theological, religious, justice-seeking tradition And that's a modern manifestation of what that means in the world. It means a Unitarian Universalism that looks pretty different from what we see in a lot of our congregations and communities today. So I'm interested in a mission-driven response, right? Outreach should be a response to the presence we already have in a community, more than having to try to convince a few individuals to come in and sort of diversify us. And we default there. Do you remember when Bill Singford like set GA on fire by telling people that gathering a few more brown folk to make you feel better on a Sunday morning was spiritually bankrupt? I thought I was going to pass out the first time I heard him say that, but we still have echoes of that, right? So I want us to lean into a Unitarian Universalism that is rich enough that the communities we are in want to be reflected, right, in the groups of UUs who gather. And that's longer, slower, vital work.
For the next question, I'm taking some pieces from the Mixed Race Caucus and from the African Descent Caucus, and these are sort of inviting you to speak from your social location. So as a Black mixed race woman, how do you navigate space in the UUA, and what advice do you have for others who are doing their own navigation? And then as a POC leader of the UUA, how will you reimagine Unitarian Universalism in a way that POC voices are held up alongside non-POC voices so that everyone is able to come with their whole self in our spiritual space?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. I identify as Afro-Latina, so I am multiracial, and of course there is whiteness in my history. It is very difficult to be in any of our colonial legacy structures, and I was raised by two BIPOC parents, which is not always what we assume we mean when we talk about multiracial and mixed-race folk. So I do want to lift that. Goodness, I mean, this has been, as you imagine, live in my ministry for all 20 years of my ministry, and during preparation as well. Wow, resisting identity politics. I try to manifest Leon Spencer in my body as a leader, who used to just warn us constantly, right? To ask questions about how and why we are being invited into leadership, who is being invited into leadership and why, what that looks like when something really should be held by a white person, because it's not ours to clean up the mess. Now, if you know me at all, you know I am often someone who cleans up messes. It's like I'm drawn to them. But being aware of that, and then of what it asks of our broader community of beloveds is really important. I want to talk about colorism. I want to talk about the fact that I am lighter in skin tone than many, many people on this call. It absolutely has everything to do with why I'm accepted as a leader in Unitarian Universalism. We have to talk about it. I sat at 7 in the morning in New Orleans at GA 2017, and I asked Bill and Leon, bless them for humoring me constantly, to put their hands in the middle of the table, and I put mine on top of theirs, and Jesse King was consulting with us, and I put all our skins together. I was like, we are the exact same shade. All four of us. I think we're all partnered to white people. Even if only in this room can we tell the truth about who is considered a palatable leader in the faith. I talk about that stuff in public. It really came up in my dialogue on The View. If you haven't watched that came really live. Some of these things are actually about talking about the really uncomfortable things. I don't want Unitarian Universalism to pause because there is yet another. Put Peter Morales, Bill Singford, and I on a spectrum. Like, have we arrived in terms of racial diversity and high level? No, we just haven't. We can get into all the other things: positional authority, ordination authority, all these things. So some of it is about truth telling. Some of it is about holding your center to what your community, what your intimate personal community holds as central, rather than what Unitarian Universalism projects onto us as BIPOC. This is really hard to do, right? Thank you to all of you, many of you, who have called me back to center on this over the years. It's so easy to get lost. It's so easy to think, here, we're going to give you 10 minutes to save your entire community. I've done this. I'm going to take that 10 minutes because things are so bad. And then my community is going to say, but you capitulated to the exact same thing again. Some of it is like really knowing who you are really knowing what's live in your community, maintaining the relationships that allow you to know what is live. And some of it, I think, also is about really leaning into the sources that strengthen you outside of Unitarian. I have a lot of spiritual support, spiritual community, and spiritual practice that have nothing to do with Unitarian Universalism. And I think it's vital. Like, there have to be things that strengthen me and that hold me accountable and that challenge me outside of UU space. It's weird. Once you get through the gamut of surviving the early years of your leadership, then it's almost like nobody wants to criticize you anymore. I get very little negative feedback. And I am far from some like realized perfect vibe. I'm just not. Nobody is, right? And so really creating those relationships and structures that will help you stay real and stay true to your community are so valuable. And of course, my community is broader, right, than BIPOC community or whatever other community, Unitarian Universalism. But I have Yobanzi Charles Johnson in my ear saying, no, know what you need from Unitarian Universalism, because just your presence, right, will always give Unitarian Universalism more than it gives you. And this is not a zero-sum game, but really having a grounded sense. Who are we called to be? Where are the gaps? How can I show up authentically? And who do I need to check in with when I know I'm too tired to even parse how I showed up on a given day? Some of you on this call get that call from me. Did I go completely off the rails? Please tell me. Where is the repair to be done? Because there always is. And I think also that modeling that humanizes leadership and empowers more people, which is important. I'm babbling. I'm going to stop.
Well, I'm gonna springboard off this idea of empowering people and leadership, developing leadership, because here at Drum, we have a very healthy mix, I think, of lay leaders and ministers that work together for a shared vision, shared community, pushing forward in our mind. We push forward the agenda of our larger communities within the UUA larger community. One of our goals has been to look at how we develop more lay leadership, so that, because I think, well, there's so much to the story, but more recently, the last few years, we've been looking at building more leadership from regional and local organizing, so that we can grow our organization and build, power. In the best sense, right? That's grassroots. How would you respond within the UUA to this model of leadership, which is really more like not top down, but really is more ground up?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Again, this is the work. Like I live with Widening the Circle behind me. We have 300 plus recommendations that I think are trying to get us to understand some of the many institutional parts that lead to a kind of leadership that looks more like what you're describing. I think it's vital, and I think it is also deep culture change. The thing is that I think Drum has a really vital role to play, as do some of our other identity-oriented kind of caucusing-based groups, where I've spent something like the last 12 years in the leadership development structures of the UUA, trying to help us get past the kind of, well, this is someone everyone knows, and so therefore they will be invited into leadership mode of leadership development, into a very different kind of approach. And one of the things that's made that excruciatingly difficult is the shift from districts to regions. There are all kinds of good reasons for us not to be in the district model anymore, but it's like you could do congregational level development work, and then regional. There used to be this room where like youth and young adults were in con spaces and had people investing with them in their own leadership, where lay leaders, of all ages also had opportunities to do like a mid-step level leadership development. And in some ways, the bottom fell out of that. There are leadership opportunities at the regional level, but it is intentionally streamlined, and there haven't been a ton of structures that allow us to do that. I get this lesson from the Black church: when no one invests in your leadership but your religious community, right? There's something incredibly profound about how we do leadership development based on someone's inherent worth rather than their credentials or their CVs or their, legacy, whatever mess that happens all the time, and how leadership happens in this country in particular. So what I get excited about with the kind of leadership structures that I see in Drum and some of the other institution, but some of them are professional groups, but really a shared more I don't think we're fully grassroots in most of our spaces, but we are more so, right, than the hierarchical bylaw-based structures of some of the national UU things. So this is vital, where we can look and say, this person has come up through the leadership in Drum, absolutely yes, let's put them into national leadership. Whereas, before, the district held some of that space and held it well enough that our congregations got out of the habit of doing more advanced leadership development. So there's this really hard gap right now. And we're finally starting to really pay attention to the fact that we are starting to reappoint leaders who keep getting appointed the way we used to, because we haven't been developing the next cadre of folk. And there's this lag before you really feel it. And horribly, then there's a lag, right, to rebuild where you've been. So I'm just grateful. I am grateful for how Drum is actually in that in-between midpoint, and I hope more of our structures will do that. And so part of my wondering also is, I don't want to feed our people to the machine, and also where are there places where our beloveds are excited to serve, do see national work as part of, right, faithful living as a UU. It changes the culture so dramatically when folks whose leadership is shaped by groups like Drum take those skills, in particular cultural race, right, into the broader work of the association. So I'm excited about that, and I'll be honest with you, actually pretty worried about it, because we are in the lag years, which is going to be hard. So your help in rebuilding our leadership bench is very appreciated.